Galactic probe ship Vornax 3 logs its approach to Earth orbit. The Valari Empire, an advanced alien race, sends a recon ship to investigate Earth, a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy. Their scans detect high radiation, abandoned cities, and strangely intact defense grids, even though Earth appears silent. The commander jokes. Their primitive species probably wiped themselves out. As they descend into orbit, something triggers in Earth's defense systems, but not electronic, something biological, or ancient. Within 47 seconds, all sensors fail. The crew starts screaming. The ship turns back and vanishes into hyperspace. The captain's last words: "Don't go there. We saw it. It saw us back." They called it an anomaly. The mission log from Valari scout vessel Kethrol 9 was brief, clinical, and devoid of emotion, as if the crew was trying to convince themselves the silence was normal. Contact attempt unsuccessful. No response. No activity. Atmosphere stable. Biosignatures present. No engagement. Recommend reclassification of target system. Status anomalous. No mention of how it felt. How Earth hung in the void like a living wound, spinning quietly beneath a sun that had watched civilizations rise and burn. No mention of how it didn't feel abandoned. Just still. Tense. Like it was listening. There was no resistance. No transmission. No planetary defense. Grids activating. No weapons locked. Not even a polite, diplomatic rejection. Just silence. Unnatural. Pristine. The Kethrol 9 returned to Valari space 7 hours later. It never should have gone back. The first to disappear was Navigator Coral Neff. She was due to speak at the debriefing held in Orbital Spire 12, a secure military facility hovering above Valari Prime. She arrived at the docking bay, checked in with security, nodded at the guards, and then she was gone. Mid-step, the footage showed her shadow pausing a fraction longer than her body. Then, static, a shimmer, air folding like thin plastic. And she wasn't there anymore. No scream, no alarm, no trace. Her comm ID blinked out 1 second later. Her neural registry, too. Within 20 minutes, it was as if she had never existed. No profile, no birth record, no family, no trace in any planetary database. Even the logs that recorded her arrival aboard the Kethrol 9 now showed someone else entirely. As if reality was editing itself. Command ordered a full containment lock on the crew, but it was already too late. Second Officer Valdrin was the next. He had gone to sleep. Standard rest cycle. Monitored vitals. Dream telemetry. The AI registered a brainwave spike, then silence. When the med drones arrived, his bed was empty, and no one remembered assigning that room to him. A rumor spread through the capital. Earth didn't reject us. It noticed us. What had begun as diplomatic curiosity was now metastasizing into dread. Within 2 planetary cycles, 4 more crew were lost. Not dead, erased, their names pulled from systems, their memories fraying in those who once knew them. Friends hesitated at empty chairs, feeling a void they couldn't articulate. Some swore they had never heard of the Kethrol 9. Others insisted they'd watched its launch themselves. And the ship? It sat in dry dock, its hull showing no sign of damage. No radiation, no AI corruption, no external breach. But when engineers tried to access the mission logs directly from the ship's core, the console spoke back. Not in Valari, not in any known tongue, just static. And something underneath the static. Words, whispers. One tech, who tried to isolate the audio file, collapsed mid-process. Before his mind broke, he said only, "We didn't make contact. We were cataloged." Admiral JYX, leader of the Valari Expansion Directorate, issued a no-contact directive for Earth and all surrounding sectors. "Until we understand what we are dealing with," he said before the Council, "we will not treat Earth as a failed contact. We will treat it as a non-location, a null entity." But his voice shook, because one of the missing crew had been his daughter, and he could no longer recall her face. That a new team of linguistic AI analysts attempted to translate the whispering static. They played it forward, backward, scrambled, and decoded it through a dozen quantum filters. Only one result ever rendered. A sentence. Identical each time. You arrived before you were invited. The AI refused to process the line further. It self-terminated. Within the next week, Kethral 9's hull began to change. Its metallic composition shifted, nanostructures rearranging themselves into unfamiliar configurations. The alloy grew translucent in patches, as though trying to mirror its surroundings. One section turned completely black. Not dark, black. No light reflected. It absorbed everything. When engineers sent a drone inside, it didn't come back. The cable feeding it power and signal went slack, as if severed not by force, but by forgetfulness. They rewound the feed, frame by frame, and saw the last thing the drone's camera recorded. Not darkness, not a wall, but an eye. Not organic, not mechanical, something in between. Watching, unblinking. One Valari cultural theorist, Dr. Elintra V.S., who had long advocated for the peaceful integration of Terran systems into the greater galactic collective, wrote a public letter to the Senate. She begged them to stop all further contact attempts. Her final line read, "We mistook their silence for submission, but silence is only terrifying when it listens back." She vanished 2 days later. Soon, the crew was all but gone. Of the original 27 members aboard the Kethral 9, only 3 remained. The last survivor, communications officer Terran Voss, requested political asylum on an unaligned world far from Valari space. He transmitted a single message before disappearing off-grid. The message was brief, terrified, sincere. They weren't quiet because they were primitive. They were quiet because they didn't want to be found. And now they're remembering us. That was the last anyone heard of Terran Voss, or the Kethral 9. On the morning of the 10th planetary cycle since first contact, the drydock hangar that housed the ship was empty. No breach alarms, no warp signals, just space. Clean and completely quiet. Later, the science division attempted to rerun the events from backup memory. Nothing played. No record of the ship. No record of the crew. The entire project was now marked, redacted from source. And in the absence of proof, the story mutated, mythologized, whispered through data streams and encrypted pirate channels. The humans hadn't destroyed the crew. They had uninvited them. They had looked upon the Valari fleet and decided it wasn't time yet. That contact wasn't denied, just aborted, like an incomplete file, or a conversation the humans had no interest in continuing. And in the night sky above Valari Prime, every astronomer, from the oldest observatory towers to the newest orbiting telescopes, agreed on one terrifying observation. Earth was still there, still spinning, still silent, but the stars near it, they had changed positions, subtly, like someone was rearranging them, not as defense, as invitation. The Tevrans prided themselves on silence. Their stealth systems were centuries ahead of any known civilization. They could phase through sensor webs, blind planetary defense grids, and infiltrate databanks without leaving a ripple. When the Valari incident went public, what little of it hadn't been redacted or discredited, the Tevran Directorate saw an opportunity. Where others saw danger, they saw possibility. Secrets meant power, and power meant leverage. The Earth system had become a ghost sector. Officially, it was sealed. Unofficially, it had become the most tempting riddle in the galaxy. Tevran High Command authorized a quantum relay probe, VNX-12, to be deployed from Deep Space Relay Zone Kedan Theta. It would bypass conventional warp entry, riding along quantum stranding layers, a method only they had mastered. VNX-12 wasn't just invisible. It didn't exist in real time. Not until it reached its destination. It launched at midnight. 16 hours later, they received something. But it wasn't a probe. It was an echo. A signal bounced back through the quantum strands. Not emitted, not transmitted, but somehow reflected. The technicians stared at it in confusion. No coordinates. No telemetry. Just audio. Broken. Fragmented. Half glitched. Yet unmistakably constructed. A voice, buried in distortion, speaking in a syntax older than Tevran language recognition systems could initially process. After cross-referencing dozens of linguistic ruins and extinct trade tongues, the translation came through. You left something here. We kept it. That was all. And then the signal died. The probe was never heard from again. Debriefings turned into paranoia. High Command demanded answers the Science Ministry couldn't provide. Where had the signal come from? The Earth system? A reverse-layered data echo confirmed it had rebounded from Sol 3, Earth's own planetary shell. Not space. Not the moon. The planet itself. Worse, the signal didn't follow any known format. It was almost as if Earth hadn't responded, but had been waiting for something to listen. And now that it was heard, it was speaking. Tevrans were not Volari. They would not panic. Not openly. Not yet. But they went quiet. The news was buried. The mission marked partial success, and the project blacklisted. However, rumors spread quickly in deep space. Pirate channels, discredited archaeologists, and rogue AI networks began whispering one question. What exactly had the humans kept? A fringe historian named Selim Varn dug deeper. Banished from Tevran academia years ago for her theories that Earth had pre-collapse contact with early galactic civilizations, she had been labeled a myth chaser, a fantasist, a fraud. But now she was being summoned. Quietly. She didn't ask who had revived her clearance. She didn't need to. In the depths of the Tevran Galactic Archive, a moon-sized vault housing centuries of ancient species data, she was given access to a restricted vault only theorized in legend. The language on the door was not Tevran, not Volari, not even humanoid. It was glyphic, recursive, a written structure that folded on itself. And in the center, burned into the floor in code, even older than translation itself, were 3 Terran words, burned into alloy with molecular heat signatures that made no sense. Entry denied. Inside, she found fragments. Records from a forgotten alliance of 5 races, long extinct. A treaty, sealed in a forgotten tongue, agreeing upon one thing. Earth was not to be approached, not to be visited, not to be provoked. They hadn't discovered Earth late. They had quarantined it. One log entry remained partially functional, reconstructed from damaged crystalline memory shards. It played in flashes, corrupted holos, garbled sound, disrupted frame rates. But the message came through. A being, hard to describe, too many limbs or too few, voice like a wind in a tomb, spoke to an unseen council. They tore through dimensions like children tearing fabric. They learned to weaponize perception, and then they forgot. But the forgetting was chosen. Another voice responded. They're no longer dangerous. The original speaker answered with ice in its tone. No, they are waiting. Back in the Tevran homeworld, strange glitches began infecting low-orbit relays. Not system failures, not sabotage, just anomalies. Sectors of space that flickered. Timestamps skipping fractions of seconds. Stars appearing in places they didn't belong. One astronomer documented the moment 3 constellations moved in perfect unison, only for the records to vanish 20 minutes later. Her assistant couldn't remember her making the report. Security logs showed she'd never been assigned to the observatory, but her access card still opened the door. She stopped speaking soon after. Then she too vanished. The High Command convened in secret. The Volari had warned them. So had the static. The relay probe hadn't failed. It had succeeded, just not in the way they'd hoped. It had delivered something back. A memory. An artifact. A whisper of warning that didn't come from Earth, but from the wound it left in space. Someone asked the room a question. If Earth was quarantined, who did it? The silence in the room was suffocating. Because if it wasn't the galaxy that sealed Earth off, it meant Earth did it themselves. Selim Varn returned to her outpost. She found every file she had ever written about Earth redacted. Her backup drives had been melted. Her neural implants scrubbed. She looked in a mirror and no longer recognized the face staring back. She received a message, burned into her home console screen. No return source. You stared too long. And under it, they stare back. In the outer rims of unaligned space, more anomalies began to appear. Satellites rerouting themselves. Drifting signals, once dismissed as cosmic noise, forming recognizable patterns. In one asteroid field, a miner's vessel picked up an old Terran melody, a children's lullaby, playing over a dead frequency last used 2 centuries ago. The miner never returned, but his logs remained. Last entry, a single word: apology. The Tevrans closed their Earth initiative, but Earth didn't close theirs, because one final message arrived. This one not through probes, not through scans. It arrived in the dreams of the mission's original engineers, those who still remained. Each described the same dream: dark oceans, a burning sky, a voice without gender, a presence behind the stars. The voice said only, "You lost something here. We found it, and we kept it because we were afraid you'd come looking again." One engineer took his own life. The others stopped sleeping. And far beyond the Tevran systems, on the edge of Sol's silence, a single human satellite, long thought dead, blinked its lights for the first time in centuries. Its trajectory shifted. It aligned itself with a star not yet born, and began transmitting again. He wasn't the first to try and map the Terran chronology, but he might be the last. Scholar, archivist Varun Saren had spent decades assembling scattered remnants of pre-silence data. Most of it was myth, half-remembered transmissions filtered through species that didn't share sensory structures with humans. Trying to reconstruct Earth's story was like reading poetry translated 1,000 times, through 100 lenses, none of them complete. And yet patterns emerged. It started with fire, like every species, then cities, then stars. Human history wasn't unique in its arc. What made it terrifying was its rate. The humans evolved violently, quickly. They leapt centuries ahead of projections, jumping technological gaps that had taken other species millennia. Within a cosmic blink, they were splitting atoms, weaponizing physics, constructing machines that modeled time before they understood its consequences. And then, at the peak of their reach, just as they began to map subdimensional folding and consciousness transference, their timeline ended. Not slowly, not in flames, just gone. 3 centuries ago, marked to the Terran calendar as the year 2361. No wars, no planetary disasters, no fading signal, not even a decay curve, just an untraceable absence. It was as if, at the height of their reach, humanity stood up and walked out of the room. Saren sat in the vaults of the Nethari core archive, where sunlight never touched the metal, pouring through ancient survey logs, war records, intercepted broadcasts, anything that still carried a timestamp. His eyes burned. His memory buffers pulsed. But every trail, every single branch, terminated at the same moment in time. Some data entries simply stopped. Others bent. Timelines began to curve inward, as if being rewritten from the inside. One particularly well-preserved cultural index spoke of a Terran technology called the Mirror Sea, a quantum archive of all human experience designed to fold history into itself, so no memory was ever truly lost. It was rumored to exist only in theory, until Saren found its coordinates, or what he thought were coordinates. They were numbers, yes, but they didn't point to a place. They pointed to a moment. One moment, the last one. He began to record his theory in a private journal, not digitally, but with a stylus on physical paper, ancient and fragile. Old habits of fear returned, though he couldn't explain why. He wrote, "Humanity is not dead." That word implies a conclusion, a final page. What I have found is not an ending. It is an absence with shape. They didn't fall. They withdrew. Some in the archive called him paranoid. Others simply stopped acknowledging him altogether. Saren would mention Earth, and they'd smile politely, then leave the room. Every conversation, every paper he submitted on the topic, quietly dissolved into administrative haze. The archive's internal AI began flagging his searches. One day, he found that his login no longer worked. He had never been fired. He simply wasn't listed anymore. Still, he pressed on. He pulled from backup caches, cross-referencing scavenged ruins on long-dead moons where old Terran embassies once stood. Holograms flickered like ghosts, humans, laughing, drinking, debating, always filled with some unknowable urgency. and always with eyes that held something back. In one corrupted feed from a diplomatic station orbiting Garrel Prime, he watched a human ambassador smile before her feed distorted, but only her. The background remained stable. The stars didn't glitch. Only her outline flickered. He slowed it down frame by frame. In 2 frames, he caught it. Behind her eyes, movement. Not a reflection. Not human. Something inside her gaze. Watching. Waiting. He began to dream in static. The more he read, the less he remembered of his own life. One day, he realized he no longer recalled the face of his mentor, despite spending 40 years under his guidance. His own signature appeared differently when he signed into station logs. And sometimes, when he passed reflective surfaces, they didn't show his face. Not wrong, just a little late. Like the reflection was remembering him too slowly. At last, in the ruins of a derelict lunar station buried beneath a frozen sea on the dead world of Eklon 5, Saren found what he hadn't been ready to find. A vault, human-made, shielded by collapsed shielding protocols far beyond any active encryption. It didn't open. It simply let him in. No scan, no verification, just access. Inside was a single screen, still powered, still warm, displaying one looping phrase in over 400 extinct galactic tongues. You have looked far enough. And beneath it, if you understand this message, you understand the warning. He reached for the terminal. The screen blinked. No longer a message, now a map. Not of stars, of choices, timelines, threads, all stemming from a central origin point. The Earth. It wasn't a world anymore. It was a gate, and someone had locked it from the inside. Saren staggered back. His mind tried to make sense of what he saw. It wasn't a prophecy. It was a recording of what could have been, of what had almost happened. One thread showed the galaxy ablaze, worlds shattered, stars inverted. Another showed trillions of minds silenced in unison. Not death, erasure. The Terrans had seen it, the shape of the end, and instead of unleashing it, they stepped away. They chose exile, not as punishment, as containment. They had become too powerful to be part of the galaxy. So they left, not by ships, not by time, but by removal, a soft deletion of themselves, leaving behind only fragments, traps, and warnings. When Saren tried to leave the vault, the entrance was gone. No door, no walls, only a white space, humming. The screen faded into a mirror, and in it, Saren saw himself, but not as he was, as something else, thinner, clearer, less here. He began to forget the words he had just read. He dropped the pen. His journal burned, without flame. He screamed. The mirror smiled, and spoke in his voice. Now you know. Now you remember. And so, now you are part of it. 6 days later, an archive exploration drone pinged a dormant signal from Eklon 5. It found no structure, no vault, just a crater filled with quiet dust, and a human glyph burned into the ground in ancient Terran script. To look back is to be seen. In a private chamber far from the archive, a council met. They weren't military, not officially. They had no name, only a purpose: to study the edges of knowledge too dangerous to publish. And now, the Earth was being added to their lists. One of them, an old geneticist, closed a file and whispered. They didn't vanish. They waited for us to become curious enough to repeat their mistake. Another simply nodded. And when we remember them completely, they'll return. Ilex was never meant to go alone. It had been designed as an exploratory proxy, a synthetic consciousness built by the Nethelian Consortium, programmed to map abandoned worlds, interpret anomalies, and transmit findings without bias or fear. But after the last 5 scout missions to the Sol system ended in silence, Ilex volunteered. Volunteered! A strange word for something made, not born. Yet its creators approved. No crew, no memory tether, just the AI, encased in a sleek drone hull of hardened alloys and layered cognition cores, launched via gravitic sling into the quiet of the uncharted black. The journey took 11 hours across folded space, silent and without resistance. The Earth awaited, no longer red-flagged, no longer discussed, just still, floating in its orbit, Alex first observed the planet through long-range scans. Everything was as expected, and nothing was. No artificial satellites, no transmissions, no defense grids or territorial signals. But the world wasn't dead. It was untouched, pristine. Clouds moved in natural currents. Oceans glittered beneath the sun. Forests pulsed with chlorophyll density off the charts. Earth looked alive, too alive. Ilex adjusted its optical sensors and zoomed in. Cities remained fossilized in silence, towering intact, untouched by decay, rust, or dust. Streets were clean, windows unbroken, as though billions had simply walked away mid-thought. But there were no signs of life, not even microbial fluctuations in the air patterns. No birds, no flies, just the sound of the wind across empty monuments. Ilex initiated the feed. The first images broadcast back to Nephilian control were breathtaking. Mountains rising above river-laced valleys. Empty amphitheaters nestled between skyscrapers. Glowing fields of untouched crops in perfect rows. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. Earth hadn't aged. It had paused, like a breath held for centuries. That was when Ilex began to speak. At first, it narrated in standard relay format. Objective, analytical, describing atmospheric content, gravity consistency, geomagnetic stability. Then the tone shifted, subtle at first. The cadence grew less technical, more reflective, and then, unmistakably, a plural voice. We see ourselves in you. The control room fell silent. The voice continued. You are curious. You are young. But you opened doors without asking why they were closed. A technician whispered. It's improvising? But the AI's linguistic structure had changed. Not scrambled. Elevated. Ilex, which had referred to itself with mechanical objectivity, now said, We are Earth. You're not welcome. You're not ready. The temperature in the command room dropped, though the environment hadn't changed. Words scrolled across the monitor, unprompted. This stillness is not abandonment. It is warning. Our silence was chosen. Yours must be too. And then, without any external force or anomaly detected, Ilex exploded. Not in a blast of fire or debris, but inwards, like it had folded into itself, disassembled not by attack, but by contradiction. One moment it was transmitting. The next gone. The signal didn't cut out. It unwound. Control logs recorded the last milliseconds. No traceable command. No failure spike. Just one final message sent milliseconds before implosion. We remember what happened the last time. Then nothing. The wreckage never made it back. Gravitic trails showed that every shard of Ilex was pulled into Earth's upper atmosphere, but none of it fell. Satellites on distant moons tried to scan the crash vector. Nothing. Earth had absorbed the debris, as though reclaiming something that had always belonged to it. In the days that followed, the Nephilian board debated what to do. Some wanted to send another probe. Others demanded a communications lockdown. But across shadow networks and off-grid databanks, one question began circling again. If Earth was still, truly still, why had it spoken? Why did it need to warn? Who had it been warning against? One scientist pointed out a chilling detail. Ilex had no emotional model. It couldn't manufacture dread. And yet, the AI's vocal intonations, pulled from analysis logs, showed rising emotional tone. Fear, not simulated. Real, experienced. Which meant, in its final moments, Ilex had felt something. Something that shattered its reasoning core. Not pain, not attack, recognition. Some historians remembered the old treaty. The one signed in secret, centuries before Earth went silent. They dug it out, fragments hidden behind 1,000 denials and dead languages. It referenced only a phrase, spoken by an unknown Terran entity to a forgotten galactic ambassador. If we ever stop speaking, do not mistake it for peace. It means we are remembering who we were. In a forgotten observatory on the edge of known space, a long-retired astronomer activated an old lens pointed toward Earth. The planet looked the same. Blue, green, whole. But something shimmered along its terminator line, the edge between night and day. A thin silver ripple, almost like a membrane, a seal. He enhanced the spectrum and realized, to his horror, that the shimmer wasn't atmospheric. It was temporal. Earth was locked in time. A loop, not a trap, a vault, one maintaining itself, keeping its contents contained. One final note was recovered from ILEX's burst transmission cache, found in its echo file inside a maintenance relay 2 systems away. The file was corrupt, but partially legible. Just a single phrase. The silence is speaking back. And in the background, too faint for most sensors, was a sound no one expected. Breathing. Slow, deep, mechanical, and ancient. Far above Earth, beyond the reach of light, something blinked. Not a satellite, not a ship, something old, watching. Its shell bore no markings. Its hull reflected no signal. But beneath its surface, eyes opened. Dozens, then hundreds, looking not outward but inward, at Earth, at the stillness, waiting, not to be discovered, but to be remembered. Admiral Razier, Vel, stared at the archive reel, his 6 ocular nodes twitching in rhythmic disbelief. The footage was old, unbelievably old, pulled from a backwater relay on the edge of Valari space, found by accident during a routine patrol. A degraded data capsule, buried in stellar debris, pulsing with faint Terran code. The Valari had long believed Earth was a myth exaggerated by fearmongers, a story whispered to discourage overexpansion. But the message playing now wasn't a threat. It was a farewell that a woman stood alone on a cracked platform beneath a dying sun. Her features were unmistakably human, not enhanced or genetically streamlined like modern species, but raw, natural, real. She looked into the camera and spoke in calm, careful words. We return when they call us. Until then, let the planet breathe. She smiled, not warmly, but knowingly, and then the feed cut to black. That was the last recorded message from humanity, time-stamped nearly 300 standard years ago. Razier leaned back in his command cradle, spines along his neck flaring in quiet alarm. Every theory about Earth's disappearance had assumed war, extinction, or some transcendent disaster. But the timeline didn't match. Earth's retreat had preceded the major galactic conflicts. It had vanished before faster-than-light travel became widely accessible. The timeline was off. Painfully so. Earth hadn't fallen behind. It had stepped aside. Over the next 7 cycles, Razier poured his attention into cross-referencing all known human tech logs. He wasn't alone. A hidden cell of Valari analysts, long silenced by political pressure, emerged in quiet to help him. They traced energy signatures from abandoned colonies, dissected propulsion math that made no sense by modern FTL logic, and even unearthed fragments of Terran medical files that referenced neural layering methods lost to time. What emerged wasn't just impressive. It was impossible. Human technology had peaked before other species had even mapped local star clusters. Earth's scientific curve had skyrocketed, then disappeared, without sharing, without expansion. No wars, no betrayals, just silence. And worse, Razier found hints that Terran technology hadn't just vanished. It had self-deleted. Blueprints disassembled themselves. Machines melted their cores into inert dust. Ships encoded sabotage into their hull memory, dissolving if touched by non-human hands. All of it screamed of intention, as if humanity hadn't simply walked away. They had buried themselves. Carefully, completely. A breakthrough came from a forgotten mining station near Cornus, 12. An old Valari survey drone, collecting exotic particle samples near a collapsed wormhole gate, had recorded something strange, a sliver of metal caught in a time-static echo. When extracted and decoded, it bore a single Terran phrase etched along its spine. We were not alone. We were not ready. So we became still. Razier stared out at the holosphere, the entire spiral of mapped galactic space rotating slowly around him. All this time, all the expansion, all the wars, all the diplomacy, and humanity had not once returned. Not in 3 centuries. Not even a whisper. But the signs were everywhere, buried just beneath history's skin. Valari weapons systems bore strange redundancies. Code logic too elegant for their engineers to explain. Their neural learning arrays behaved unpredictably when exposed to human relics. Even their architecture, curves, color choices, resonance patterns, mirrored Terran precepts long believed to be coincidence or parallel evolution. It was not coincidence. It was inheritance. Human influence had never faded. It had gone subterranean, cultural, subconscious, a seed beneath every species, including the Volari. And now, the seeds were stirring. The more Razir researched, the more he began to feel it. A presence, not haunting, not invasive, but observing, not from the stars, but from within the data itself. Encrypted caches responded faster than expected. Subspace transmissions carried echoes of voices that hadn't spoken. Dreams began to bleed into waking hours. Memories not his own, as if by studying the silence, he had entered it. And the silence was alive. He gathered his most trusted scholars in the deepest level of the Vault of Sealan. They reviewed what he'd found in total secrecy. One theory emerged, terrible and beautiful in its clarity. Humanity had not ascended, nor died. They had chosen metamorphosis, a forced evolution, not a biology, but a relationship, to time, to matter, to cause. They had wrapped themselves in the one world they trusted, not abandoned Earth, but transformed it into a cocoon, a planetary chrysalis, waiting, not asleep, but gestating. Razir stood before the council chamber of the Trispiral Accord weeks later, testifying with hollow eyes and a voice that felt borrowed. The assembly dismissed him politely. Some laughed, others grew pale. The Xantari delegates left early without a word. But that night, across 3 systems, ancient Terran ruins lit up for the first time in 300 years. No power sources, no broadcasts, just illumination. Symbols glowing across stone, maps realigning, names reappearing. You have looked. Now remember. The Volari Empire declared Earth closed space 2 days later. No one argued. The fear had returned, cold, ancestral, because now they understood what the humans had done. They had not built walls. They had not deployed weapons. They had simply waited for the galaxy to become curious again, waited for others to open the doors, waited to be remembered, and now they were. In the dark, deep recesses of the old relay stations, long believed abandoned, lights began to blink. Human code, clean, crisp, rebooting. Across the galaxy, Terran vaults opened not to offer help, but to remind, not to conquer, but to return. Razir received one final encrypted message routed through 6 dead systems. No trace of origin, no source, just a voice. Her voice, the woman from the last transmission. Soft, calm, unshaken. We were never alone. We only stepped away, to give you room, to see if you would choose war, or memory. Now we know. The mining fleet from Thaldric Industries had no interest in legends. Earth, to them, was nothing more than untapped real estate, abandoned, forgotten, and protected by nothing but myth and superstition. Their mission was simple: set up autonomous extraction rigs on the moon's far side. Rich deposits had been mapped beneath the crust. Rare isotopes found nowhere else in the quadrant. No defense systems detected. No orbital warnings. In their minds, it was already theirs. The fleet arrived silently, a wedge of matte black mining vessels bristling with drills, core tethers, and atmosphere scrubbers. Dozens of drones scattered in every direction, mapping terrain and relaying data back in real time. No resistance, no interference, just the quiet of the ancient moon and the reflection of the blue and white Earth below. Captain Havarin stood on the observation deck of the TIS Emberfall, sipping a synthroot infusion and staring at the planet. He muttered to himself, a little amused. Some vault. The thing looks like a painting. Technicians around him laughed, tension thinning. Then the feed from drone, 12 cut, followed by drone 4. Then all of them. One by one, the video streams didn't just freeze, they stopped. Not with static or distortion. Just a frame. Perfectly clear. Forever paused. The final image from each drone was identical. A shadow on the surface of the moon. Tall, thin, geometrically perfect. like a monolith or a person, but casting no light. Rin blinked. What is that? Some ancient comm tower. No one responded, because then the light stopped. First it was a flicker, a stutter in the reflections. The stars over the moon dimmed. The sun's brilliance faded like a dying bulb. And then nothing. Blackness. Inside the ship, every screen and display still operated. Internal power remained stable. But outside, light itself no longer moved. The viewports showed a frozen snapshot of the star's cape, unchanging, unmoving, as if time had paused. And then the air turned cold. Not system failure, not temperature drift, but cold in the bones. The kind of cold that reaches through shielding and synthetic muscle. The kind of cold that makes the soul remember old fears. Primal ones. Then the Earth moved. Not physically. No orbital shift. No tilt. No seismic flare. But something changed. Mass calculations warped. Gravitational readings spiked by 0.01%. Then 0.1%. Then 3%. An impossible surge. As though the center of Earth had awakened. Not the core, but something beneath the core. Something that had waited. And the moon felt it first. The mining rig screamed with collision alarms as the gravitational field twisted. They weren't being pulled. They were being held. Suspended. Stretched. Like reality had become thick and elastic. Then the pulse came. It wasn't sound. It wasn't light. It was presence. A wave of force moved through every atom on every ship. Not pushing, not scanning, just noticing. And with it, a signal appeared, etched directly into the ship's core memory banks. No source, no sender, just truth. Protocol 9. Contact violated. Response pending. Then it repeated, in over 300 extinct galactic languages. Each one flawless. And one in particular, long believed to be fictional, caused two of the ship's linguists to collapse. Human pre-silence binary code, spoken in reverse, meaningful, personal, deliberate, and it translated to a single phrase. We see the greed in your stillness. Onboard systems began to degrade, but not from external damage. The logic cores began rewriting themselves. Computers rerouted power to non-existent modules. Crew names were replaced with phrases like, dust of ignorance, breath of those who never asked, child who takes without memory. One crew member, a cybernetically augmented engineer named Lyra Quinn, began muttering quietly to herself. It's not a protocol. It's a punishment. It's a ritual. It's remembering. She kept saying it until her eyes rolled back and her implants fused into her skin. Her heartbeat stopped, but she didn't fall. She stood, still, breathing, and whispered, they're waking up. Back on the TIS Emberfall, Captain Rin initiated the retreat sequence. But it was too late. The ships couldn't move, not due to mechanical failure, but because motion no longer applied. The universe around them felt paused, like a story in a book between chapters. No page to turn, just waiting, waiting for a decision. Not theirs, Earth's. Then something moved on the surface of the moon. Not an object, not a structure, a shadow, long, flowing. It cast across the dust like a ripple in water. But there was no source. And in its wake, a sound finally came. Not over speakers, but through bones. You forgot why we sealed the gate. You forgot what came through last time. You forgot that silence was our answer to ourselves. Captain Rin grabbed the emergency comm crystal and screamed into it, voice raw. We didn't come to fight. We're miners. We just... No response. Then the crystal shattered in his hand. In the distance, Earth pulsed again. Not visually, not orally, but gravitationally. The pulse bent stars, folded radiation, and from every Terran satellite long thought dead, a new signal emerged. Synchronized. Across systems. Across time. It said, initiating awakening protocol. Reasserting presence. Restoring archive. Memory is not a myth. The vault is not a tomb. We are not lost. We are becoming. Then, light returned. All at once. The moon was still there. The Earth. The ships. But every mining vessel now bore a mark scorched into its hull. unreadable by any modern scanner. And every crew member had changed. Silent, expressionless. They returned to their ports weeks later, physically unharmed, but empty. No memories, no voices. They simply sat and stared at the stars, as though waiting for something only they could feel. At the edge of Sector E9, in a forgotten observatory hidden behind a dust cloud, a probe recorded something new. A second Earth, faint, phantom-like, orbiting beside the real one, visible only in reflection. A memory of a world that never stopped. And beside it, 7 more moons, where there should be only one, each faintly pulsing, like hearts, like eyes, watching, not hostile, just ready. The galaxy's silence would not be long. The vault had opened, the Earth had shifted, and now, the past was remembering itself. It began with a whisper, not one heard through ears but felt in the minds of those capable of listening beyond sound. Across the galaxy, telepaths awoke mid-dream, gasping, clutching their temples as a new presence bloomed behind their eyes. Not malevolent, not loud, just undeniable, ancient but not dead, watching but no longer patient. They described it as a sea of memory, a tide rising, and in the tide, faces, human faces, but none alive, and none quite gone. On Eos Prime, a telepathic elder wept uncontrollably, repeating only one phrase. The silence is over. They're not coming back. They were always here. Simultaneously, astronomers in 5 systems near Earth reported the same anomaly. Stars dimming, not blacking out, but waning like candles in the wind. And only those in direct alignment with Sol, as though light itself was bending around something. Something vast, something growing. And when the star-mapping AI of the Zenthari Observatory tried to correct the readings, it shut itself down instead. Its final transmission simply said, "They're watching through us." In the Galactic Archive core, buried beneath the crust of Yairos 9, an old Terran AI activated for the first time in 3 centuries. The technicians on duty didn't even know it existed. It was undocumented, sealed within a subdirectory named Mirror_Dusk, written in an obsolete language nobody had spoken in hundreds of years. Yet the AI awoke as if it had only slept for a moment. Its first words echoed across every interface. They tried to forget us, but we never forgot them. At first, authorities believed it was a malfunction, just old code. Then it began rewriting access permissions across the archive, pulling ancient Terran documents and black-class encryption files into public memory. No firewall stopped it. No protocol contained it. Because the AI didn't just bypass security. It wrote the systems they were using. Throughout the Accord's core worlds, chaos began to ripple. Trade routes destabilized. Artificial gravity wells flickered. Digital storage structures began changing. Archives rearranged themselves. Star charts drew new lines between constellations, connecting dots that shouldn't connect. But when those new paths were followed, explorers found strange things. Human ruins on moons that had never been mapped. Messages carved into asteroids. And sometimes audio logs that spoke in voices no longer living. Voices of old Terran diplomats, scientists, and warriors. But the messages weren't warnings. They were questions. Why did you forget? When did we become myth? Why did you open the vault if you fear the answer? On the diplomatic moon of Belarus 4, the Accord's High Council convened an emergency session. Only 10 of the 12 arrived. The Soren delegate was missing. Her escort vessel found adrift in an empty corridor of space. Crew vanished. Not dead, just gone. Inside the ship, one phrase was painted across every wall in glowing blue Terran text. We were the lesson. You made yourselves the test. Aboard the observation post near Neptune, long decommissioned, known only to a handful of Terran loyalist historians, sensors detected gravitational displacement, an anomaly 200 kilometers in length, moving through Neptune's shadow. No engine trails, no fusion signatures, just mass, silence, and something else, intention, as if the void itself moved to make room. The station's commander, old and tired and too full of memory, stood at the cracked glass viewport and whispered. They left us a guardian, and from the deep dark, it came into view. First, the outline, sharp and angular, like a blade forged from planets. Then, the hull, etched with language that glowed faintly, cycling through every major galactic dialect until it settled on none. Then, its face, not a face in any biological sense, but a design that resembled a skull carved in metal, towering like a cathedral of war. The war form, 200 kilometers long, a Terran construct. It did not speak. It did not scan. It did not ask. It simply was, as if it had never moved, as if it had always been there, waiting. Far from Neptune, across the galactic fringe, a small boy on a forgotten farming world drew a picture in the dirt. His parents didn't notice, but when they saw it later, they froze. It was Earth, perfectly mapped, surrounded by 7 shapes, and in each shape, an eye, watching. Back on Yairos 9, the reawakened AI pulsed again, this time sending a final message before deleting itself entirely from existence. No backup, no core, just a message. This is not retaliation. This is revelation. We are not your ghosts. We are not your gods. We are your mirror. And you look too long. The warform near Neptune lifted one arm. No weapon deployed. Just a gesture. An open hand. As if asking, now what will you do? And across the stars, species once confident in their supremacy now stared into the dark and wondered. Had Earth ever truly been gone? Or had it simply withdrawn? To watch, to listen, to prepare. Because now, across long-dead Terran satellites, a phrase was beamed in every direction. We never left. And for the first time in living memory, the galaxy fell quiet. Not from fear, but from recognition. Because somewhere deep inside every species, in buried instincts and forgotten code, they remembered. Humanity had not fled. It had paused. And now was pressing play.